Consumer Protection, Rosa Escareno, and also joined by our local liquor control commissioner, Shannon Trotter. A little bit of housekeeping before I pass it off to the commissioner to get us started. First of all, I want to thank you all for joining us today. We know that this was very last minute, but we do believe it is very important, still a couple weeks out from Halloween, to reiterate and go over best practices for bars and restaurants to make sure we have a safe and responsible Halloween. We will be recording this webinar, so I know this was very last minute, so we can send out the recording following this. We also will be sending out some other information following this webinar as well. We do want a big part of today is making sure we have the ability to answer questions. So I ask if you can to please submit your questions via the chat function on this webinar. Again, the chat function. And then we will work to get you those answers over the course of the webinar. We'll definitely leave some time at the end for that. So before we get fully into the details of this presentation, I do want to let Commissioner Escareno give a couple words before we get started.
Thank you, Isaac, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Most important, thank you to all our business operators, owners, managers for working with us as a city to follow the guidelines throughout this entire COVID. Today's conversation is going to be about continuing to work together to ensure that we stay the course. And our goal here at the Department of Business Affairs, we hold many hats, as all of you know, but it's certainly one of supporting businesses while at the same time striking that balance of regulating and making sure that we are all, continuing to follow those guidelines. One important point is that, as you know, we have seen a dramatic increase in cases in Wisconsin, and we have also now just recently the closure of Indiana and many of the other southern suburbs of Illinois are just continuing to, those cases of COVID are continuing to increase. Everything that we do here is guided by the health commissioner's guidance, and so long as we maintain the case growth under the 5%, I think we can stay and continue to operate. Why it's important to have a check-in with you guys at this time is that we're going from summer to the fall and the winter, and with that comes much more inside operations, as well as important celebrations that our city celebrates, every year throughout the years. We see Halloween, the holidays are coming up, and we want to make sure that we're arming our business community with all the tools that you need. Important to today's conversation is going to be our bars, restaurants, hotels, all of you that deal in the world of hospitality. So Shannon Trotter, our liquor commissioner, is joining us today. And then Isaac Reichman, who is our director of media and engagement here at the department, will lead us through this presentation. So again, on behalf of the entire BACP team, I just want to thank all of our businesses. We are launching a lot of other campaigns to make sure that we're supporting you guys through this difficult time, and that we are continuing to ensure that the customers, the residents feel safe by all the actions that you guys are taking. So again, thank you for everything you do, and I'm going to hand it over to Shannon Trotter, our liquor commissioner. So Shannon.
Thank you, Rosa, and thank you everyone for joining us today. It's really important to have this conversation as we start to approach our Halloween festivities in particular. As you all know, that's a very high traffic time for bars and restaurants, and this year is even more important that we're following the regulations and the COVID guidelines. We are seeing increased numbers again in Lincoln Park. We are seeing increased numbers again for the 18 to 29-year-olds. So it's really imperative that we follow all of the guidelines so that we can continue taking steps to move forward, especially as winter comes, rather than moving backwards, so that we can have the indoor capacity that is needed to really survive. for the hospitality industry. So with those larger crowds, with those expected events that are happening, it's going to be imperative that you have your sufficient staff and that you are prepared for those crowds to come. We would like to take the opportunity today to review some updates on our health data, and we will also give a refresher on the guidelines that went into effect on October 1st, increasing indoor capacity for retail food establishments and allowing indoor capacity for taverns. We will also go over some of our enforcement practices and some tips and practices for the operational requirements, reminders, how to best come into compliance with not only the COVID guidelines, but how to make sure that you're managing any crowds or any congregating that might be around or inside your establishment, because we must make the progress to get, we're at 40% capacity. Our goal is to get even more increased capacity inside, but we cannot do it if our numbers start rising. So we really need everyone's participation and compliance with the guidelines during the Halloween weeks. So with that, I will turn it over to Isaac, who can get us started.
Health data. Again, thank you. We'll start by giving an update on the health data. Here's a graph that shows the cumulative new COVID-19 case count and 7-day average. In Chicago, we're currently at 364 new cases a day. This is as of yesterday. There's one thing that this number is a little bit higher than when we began loosening our restrictions on October 1st. There is an important caveat to go along with this number. So first, let me say that we are obviously a little bit concerned that cases are starting to go back up. But an important caveat with this number is that we are testing more than we ever had. Some days we're over 10,000 tests a day. So that's a very good sign. So even while our cases have gone up, which is something very concerning that the health department is looking at very closely, our positivity rate remains at around that 4.4% number, where we placed the 5% as that threshold where we really do want to stay below. So this is something that the health department is keeping a close eye on, but I do want to make it clear that the case count is not the end-all be-all. There's a number of other different metrics that are looked at. But all this is to say, this is why we want to have this conversation 2 weeks out before Halloween, to make sure that you all have time to prepare and to remind everybody on the call of the important guidelines for COVID-19, and then also just in general to make sure we have a safe and responsible Halloween. Move to the next slide. So first, before we get into the specifics for Halloween, I do want to take this opportunity to remind everybody of the new regulations for bars and restaurants that came into effect 2 weeks ago, October 1st, 2021. Indoor capacity. Every type of establishment citywide that was operating at 25% capacity, it can now operate at 40% capacity. So this includes restaurants, establishments that serve food. It also includes health and fitness centers and non-essential retail and a variety of other establishments that were at 25 and can now expand to 40. Please note, however, that the maximum is still 50 people within a room or a space. And also, as has always been the case for restaurants and bars, you still must have tables that are 6 feet apart that have 6 or fewer people at that table. So if you cannot keep, rising to 40% capacity means that tables need to be within closer than 6 feet, then that would not be allowed. So you need to follow all of those different restrictions. Breweries, taverns, bars, and other establishments that serve alcohol without a food license may be open for indoor seating, however, now at 25% capacity or 50 people, whichever is fewer. And bars and restaurants, which were previously required to stop serving alcohol at 11 and close at 12, can now serve alcohol until 1 and may remain open until 1:30. So those are the 3 main changes that affect bars and restaurants. Hopefully everybody on this call is aware of these, but I do want to take this opportunity to remind everybody of these regulations again, that have been in effect over the last 2 weeks. And now, if you can go to the next slide, I do want to provide the detailed guidelines, and I'm not going to read everything on these slides in detail. Hopefully, many of you have already attended our webinars and seen all of these in detail, but I do want to remind everybody of the entirety of the guidelines that are in effect, that we anticipate that will be in effect over Halloween. Want to remind everybody of these guidelines. First, as I said, tables must be 6 feet apart. If you cannot space tables 6 feet apart, you should be decommissioning tables and or adding a physical barrier if they can't be removed. So if 6 feet of social distancing is not possible between tables, you can use impermeable barriers. We also recommend using impermeable barriers at places like checkout, for example, where social distancing is not possible. Table capacity is still limited to no more than 6 people. As I said, if you have a establishment with a retail food license, limited to 50 individuals or 40% capacity. You do not have a retail food license, limited to 50 individuals or 25% capacity, whichever is fewer. Next, protective gear should be worn by all customers and employees. They can only be removed by customers while they are seated and actively eating or drinking. I want to emphasize that this is the main violation that we have found throughout reopening has been, and this is at bars, restaurants, all other establishments, all other businesses, has been lack of wearing face coverings. So this is something very easy when our investigators show up. If people are walking around without face coverings, if employees have face coverings pulled down below their nose, that's an immediate and obvious citation for us. So this is the main thing that we have seen. Number one has been face coverings, and number two has been social distancing. So what we've typically seen in bars and restaurants is people milling about around the bar or around standing in crowds around tables. That's not okay. People need to be seated and they need to be at tables 6 feet apart while they're eating and drinking. Hand sanitizer or hand washing facilities should be readily available for both employees and customers. Move on to the next slide. So at minimum, you should be having some sort of screening measure for your employees at minimum. And again, at minimum, posting some sort of pledge upon entrance. And we encourage folks to do more than that, to do temperature screenings, to do things like that. But at minimum, you should be having some sort of self-screen. Employees should be making sure they're not coming to work if they're sick. Standard daily cleaning standards should be in place. Again, hand sanitizer for patrons or employees. Disposable table items are something we strongly encourage. If you do not have them, cleaning and sanitizing them. You should have visual guidance posted throughout your establishment and at the entry. This is something that you can find at the chicago.gov/reopening site if you need it. Next, and this is really important and one of the main things we find, all patrons must be seated. I know this conversation is all about Halloween parties and events and things like this. Everybody must be seated while they are eating and drinking. So you cannot have large crowds of people, even small crowds of people, standing up, mingling while they are eating or drinking. All patrons must remain seated. You can have counter or bar seating open with that 6 feet of social distancing still in place. So you need at least, one party can come and sit at the bar. You need at least 6 feet between them and other parties. If you are a tavern or an establishment that does not have a food license, you must remain seated while ordering. And the reason for this is with the reopening of taverns, we're concerned about people congregating by the bar when going up to order their drinks. So if the establishment is a tavern and does not have a retail food license, they must have customers must remain seated while they are eating. You can have cafeterias, buffets, other things like this. They can be open, but the employee must be serving the food and wearing proper PPE. If you do not have a retail food establishment license, you must make sure that food is available whenever the establishment is open. So this can be very simple. This does not need to be a formal partnership. This does not need to be anything very, very formal. It just means that patrons must have the ability to order food while they are at your establishment. Move on to the next slide. As much as possible, minimize shift overlap and in-person interactions. Establishments that don't have a retail food license should be limiting their seating to a maximum of 2 hours. We strongly encourage reservations as much as possible, and do strongly recommending limiting travel. And then also you should be prepared for the eventuality of somebody contracting, an employee contracting COVID-19. You should be following those CDC guidelines before returning to work. And any employee or anyone who has had close contact with someone diagnosed with COVID-19 should self-quarantine. Additionally, we strongly recommend if you have 2 or more cases possibly associated with your establishment, that you should be reporting those cases to the health department. You do not need to report 1 case, individual cases. Just the health department is notified of every single case, both positive and negative, every single test of COVID-19. But if you have 2 or more cases to help with contact tracing, you should be reporting those to the health department. You also should strongly recommend that you retain an email or phone number to help with possible contact tracing. There is, just so for awareness, we get this question all the time, there is not a formal requirement for you to close if an employee gets COVID-19. That is something that really needs to be determined on a case-by-case basis. The health department has a long set of guidelines and questions you should be following if and when an employee has COVID-19. Not a requirement. Some establishments are choosing to close based on the number of cases they have, but it is not a formal requirement. Okay. You can move on to the next slide. Finally, before getting into some more specific details related to Halloween, I wanted to talk about alcohol sales. And just as a reminder, and split up this slide based on the type of license that establishments might have. So if you have a tavern or a consumption on premises incidental activity liquor license, then your indoor liquor sales can stay and must end at 1 a.m. And then you must close your doors by 1:30 a.m. Something to keep in mind as you're planning Halloween events. However, your outdoor operations must follow the dictated hours that are built into your license or permit. So if you have a sidewalk cafe or an outdoor patio or an expanded outdoor dining permit, then you must follow the specific hour restrictions of that permit. So now, even though alcohol sales can now go until 1 a.m., sidewalk cafes and outdoor patios and expanded outdoor dining permits, they all have operating hours that typically end before those. So it varies depending on your permit, but make sure that you are following those guidelines. Hopefully, as you know by now, you can sell cocktails to go. Those must be sold in a sealed and tamper-evident container. Now, if you have a packaged goods license and do not have a tavern or a consumption on premises license, then alcohol sales must end at 9 p.m. You cannot sell cocktails to go, and other activity may continue until hours as determined on your license or permit. Moving on to the next slide. So just as a reminder, I want to, especially as we're starting to think through events and programming around Halloween, I just want to remind everybody, and I know Commissioner Trotter can talk about this a little bit as well, that outdoor patios, sidewalk cafes, and expanded outdoor dining permits have specific restrictions in place. So outdoor patios cannot have live or recorded music in any area licensed as an outdoor patio. Sidewalk cafes, no music shall be played, whether live or recorded in the sidewalk cafe. And on expanded outdoor dining, music and entertainment of any kind is prohibited, whether it's in your parking lot, on private property, or on the sidewalk, or on the street. So just something as a reminder, this is something many of you have been operating with these for quite a while by now, but just as a reminder, there are restrictions in place for these permits, and these are specific related to entertainment, but also just want to remind you to follow the various guidelines and regulations that are in place for each of those permits or licenses. On to the next slide. Great, so now I'm going to pass it on to Shannon, who's going to talk a little bit about best practices for bars and taverns as you're planning Halloween, and then we will, after she's done, we'll open it up for a couple questions.
Thanks. So, yeah, we'll start with some best practices, and after this is over, we'll also email a flyer that we have that you can distribute to your staff or other members of your teams to go over some of these regulations. But the first is that you must control your occupancy. You have to know what your placard says, and then you have to reduce it by 40% to getting, if you can maintain the 6-foot table spacing. So you need to make sure that you know your occupancy based on the 40% or 25% limit, depending on your license type, and that your staff knows what that is. You will be made responsible for maintaining that occupancy, and the best way to do that is by using clickers so that each room maintains its own proper occupancy. So if you have multiple rooms, you should have staff at each room with a clicker so that it's, one, available to our inspectors should they come, but two, that you always know that you are in compliance with your capacity. If you have any lines to get into your establishment because it is at capacity, know that we discourage the use of lines. We encourage the use of a reservation system only. But if you choose to have a line, then it is your responsibility to control the line. You have to make sure that you have sufficient staff on hand to control not only the interior of the premises, but any line or congregating around your premises. So if you have a line, you are responsible for maintaining 6-foot distance between each party and make sure that everyone is wearing a mask. So make sure that you have sufficient security outside asking people to move along. If they're just congregating and you're not allowing a line, but they're simply congregating because you're at capacity and they're trying to find another location to go to or figure out their plan, you need to have someone outside asking them, killing them with kindness, asking them to move along, move swiftly along so that they're not congregating, especially in front of your establishment. You need to make sure that you have signage. You need to make sure that your staff are aware that everyone must be wearing masks and that Halloween costume masks are not sufficient to meet the mask requirement. It needs to be a mask that is covering their nose and mouth and only is removed while actively eating or drinking. You should have hand sanitizer available for all of your guests so that everyone, upon entry can use the hand sanitizer, and, in any high-touch areas or areas where people are frequenting, you should have the hand sanitizer also available. You need to make sure that you are enforcing seating requirements. Patrons must remain seated while eating and drinking. And one point of clarification that I think has been lost a little bit is how this applies to lounge seating. If you have lounge seating, meaning couches where parties of 6 or less are seated, they have to be seated. It's not enough to stanchion off that area and allow people to congregate amongst themselves within that area. They have to be seated while eating or drinking, not congregating in an area that has been sectioned off for them. So that's very important to make sure that everyone on your staff understands that as well. Dance floors are not permitted. We're not actively allowing dancing. You can have bands or DJs, but they cannot. You cannot allow dancing. Again, making sure that you have sufficient staff. Again, encouraging a reservation system. You are allowed to take the reservations, and if you choose to, have a food and beverage package, that is also allowed. You can sell food and beverage packages. If you are having any entertainment included in that, then you have to follow the PPA license requirements, meaning if your capacity is over 100 and you are offering a DJ or band, then you must have a PPA license to sell those tickets. But otherwise, you are allowed to sell food and beverage tickets without a PPA license, and we encourage that as a means of securing reservations so that you hit your capacity limits. Next slide. This is the tip sheet that I referenced. We'll be sending this out after the webinar is over, but it really touches a lot about the things that I've already discussed, making sure that everyone is out of your premises and that it is closed by 1:30. In terms of allowing cocktails to go or the sale of cocktail kits or other packaged goods, growlers, making sure that those sales are ending at the 1 o'clock deadline. And then making sure that you know, as always, even in non-COVID times, that you are complying with being a good neighbor, meaning, you know, if you have an outdoor area, you need to maintain the proper noise levels, and you should not have any amplified sound outside or music or entertainment. Stopping the sale of alcohol to anyone who appears to be intoxicating, relying on BACP training to make sure there isn't overservice, especially if, you know, because there is a 2-hour seating limit at Taverns, if people start to do a bar crawl and they get to your establishment on that, you know, second or third stop, making sure that they are not intoxicated, because that they're going to be in your establishment not complying with the COVID guidelines, and then you're putting your patrons and your staff at risk. So we need everyone's help in making sure that we're not over-serving patrons or even allowing entry to any patrons who are exhibiting any signs of overconsumption. Last on the list, if you are having any outdoor events, they are generally disallowed. So what is allowed is outdoor dining, meaning outdoor eating and drinking, either on a licensed patio, a permitted sidewalk cafe, or a permitted expanded outdoor dining area. There are no special events licenses being issued for anything that would be more of an Oktoberfest or of a Halloween festival type atmosphere or haunted house. None of those are permitted at this time due to COVID. So you must have the proper permits for outdoor dining, proper permits or licenses, and as Isaac stated, you need to be sure to be complying with the hours of operation. So generally patios are Sunday through Thursday till 11 p.m., Friday and Saturday till midnight. If you're in the central business district, it's till midnight every night. And then your sidewalk cafe and your expanded outdoor dining permits have the times printed on them. It's generally 10, 11, or midnight, depending on your specific permit. Next slide. And so finally, just a reminder that BACP will continue to respond to complaints and proactively canvass entertainment districts. You know, to date, we have had over 2,300 investigations, and we have cited 149 businesses. Unfortunately, we have had to issue extensive closures to 3 businesses for, you know, egregious violations. One of the most egregious violations is a capacity violation. People that have capacity, they're beyond their normal non-COVID capacity. It's just inexcusable, and it's just a health risk to everyone. And those cases can lead up to fines of up to $10,000, and in some cases, license suspension or revocation. And I would like to also stress that one of the biggest violations that we're seeing when we are doing our investigations is failure to produce your dram shop insurance certification. So if you can always have a staff member, your manager, know where your dram shop certificate is, it would just avoid us having to sort of wait around for them to try to produce it and then, you know, issuing a citation for failure to produce it. So always have that on hand, and always have, you know, a manager on hand who can greet any enforcement and knows what the capacity limits of each room or floor is in your establishment. So with that, I will turn it over to Isaac.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Shannon. We do want to now take some time to answer questions. I want to reiterate what Shannon and Rosa said, just the importance of continuing to follow these guidelines as we move on into the holiday season, particularly on Halloween. You know, as Shannon just mentioned, we have been and will be continuing to enforce. You know, we know that this is that Halloween is a time for celebration, and we want folks to celebrate. We want everyone to do it safely and responsibly. So we will be out throughout Halloweek and Halloween weekend doing enforcement, and you know, we hope that folks are following the guidelines and doing the right thing, and we expect that you all will. I want to make it clear, we have cited almost 150 businesses, but we've also done a lot of proactive investigations in entertainment districts and found a lot of establishments to be doing the right thing and to be doing a great job complying. And we expect that will continue. We hope that will continue, and we thank you all in advance for helping make sure that continues into the future, particularly, again, as we're getting more indoors and as we are getting into the colder season. So I'm going to open it up for a couple of questions. Shannon, I'll handle some of these, and I'll pass some of them over to you first. And Shannon, I believe that I know this answer, but if you can provide the answer here, what is the new license renewal deadline to pay for license fees that were extended?
The new deadline is the end of October, so October 31st.
Great, thank you. Are there set guidelines around private events or buyouts? As we approach the holidays, businesses typically do a buyout of a bar or restaurant to host their company holiday parties. This is one I can answer, and then Shannon and Rosa, if you have anything to add. So these guidelines are in place whether you're operating your bar or restaurant typically, or if you're having a private party come in. So the rules that we just follow do not change, and ultimately it is the responsibility of the licensee to make sure that the rules are followed, even if they have a private party come in. So that is something that we have seen. We've cited establishments that said, we didn't know they weren't following the rules. It was a private party. Ultimately, that is the responsibility of the licensee. So do make sure that if this is something you're doing, that you understand the risk and that you make sure that these guidelines are being followed. And if you want more details specifically, I covered it all relatively quickly. If you go to the chicago.gov/reopening site, which I will type into the chat right now, you can follow detailed overview of the food service and bars guidelines and also event venues guidelines there as well. I am in the process, and Shannon, this is a question for you. I am in the process of licensing a new venue. Has the timeline for liquor and PPA licenses been prolonged due to COVID? Can you also maybe talk a little bit about what the license process is like as we are still in the midst of COVID?
Sure. So no, the license process has not changed. We are fully operational in the issuance of licenses. It's just all online now. So a liquor or a PPA license, there is a minimum 35-day waiting period, and then there must be a decision within 60 days once your application is being submitted. So anywhere from 35 to 60 days for both a liquor and a PPA license. The way that the process works now is that you go to our Chicago Business Direct website and you would begin your license application. You would enter your initial information. The first step is that it would go for zoning review. Once you get your zoning review approval, then your application will be directed to a hospitality business consultant who will work with you both on the phone and via email to intake all of your documentation, and then it can move forward with review and inspection.
And if I may add, in terms of just renewal, as many of you know, the city did defer licensing renewal from the beginning of COVID through October 31st. So the deferral of licenses will come due at the end of October. I know that our team is putting out public notices so that we are informing all licensees that may have not renewed the licenses through this term. We allowed for that, so no one is being penalized. But after October 31st, that term does expire.
Great, thank you. We got the question, will the presentation be available after the webinar? Yes, this is being recorded. We will send it. It will take typically a day for it to process, but we will send it around, and do feel free to share it. We also will be sending around, as Shannon mentioned, the best practices tips flyer, and we hope that you can help us circulate that as well to make sure that everybody has that. I got a question about karaoke. My understanding is that karaoke is allowed, provided that you can do it while following the rest of the guidelines. That means people cannot be eating and drinking while they are performing. That means that you need to maintain 6 feet of social distancing. while that is happening. So there's something that is allowed, but obviously it has the potential to lead to other violations. So if you can't do karaoke while also following all the other guidelines, please do, that should be discontinued. See some other, just a reminder, if you can, to please use the chat and please send it to all panelists to make sure that everybody here can see those chats as they come in. Great question. Do those same rules apply for pool, darts, etc.? Yes. Things like pool, darts, other arcade games, they can be open. Those same rules do apply for them, meaning you cannot be eating or drinking while you are using these activities, and that you must be maintaining 6 feet of social distancing. So if you have, two pinball sets that are within 3 feet of each other, those should not both be open at the same time. So these things can be open, but you always must be seated if you're eating and drinking. Face coverings should be worn anytime you're using these, and all those other guidelines must be followed as well. Karaoke, how much distance from the seated performer to the audience should be enforced? It's a great question. It should be 10 feet of distance. That's the same rule if you have bands, if you are at a church or any sort of religious service and you have singers. That's generally the rule for performance venues. It's 10 feet of social distancing between performers and the guests. And again, a reminder to send the questions in to all panelists. Games, another couple questions coming in related to games, karaoke, things like that. They should be cleaned between use. Any sort of high-touch item, any sort of item that is touched by multiple people should be cleaned between use. And I do want to point you all specifically to that reopening site. Not only do we have food service and bars guidelines, we also have indoor attractions guidelines and event venues guidelines to help you understand these in a little bit more detail. Great. We'll stay on for just another couple minutes if you have any questions. If you do have any questions, we will stay on, but I do want to maybe remind everybody that the importance of following all these guidelines, both for Halloween and over the next weeks and months. As I said, we've seen cases go up a little bit over the last couple of weeks. We want to make sure to bring them back down, and we want to make sure to maintain or improve upon our positivity rate. So really do appreciate that. Shannon, Rosa, do you have anything you would like to add?
No, thank you. Not just some parting remarks is that if you ever have questions about the guidelines, we're always happy to answer them. You can reach out to any one of us and we can get you the answer. We really are looking for compliance. We are not looking to take enforcement action against anyone. We are looking for compliance, and our goal is really to move you to greater capacity as soon as possible in a safe manner. But we need the cooperation of the bars and restaurants to make sure that the patrons are staying safe and following the guidelines within your establishment, and that keeps your staff safe, that keeps your patrons safe, and it keeps our numbers down, which allows us to then move forward in the restrictions and easing up on the restrictions. So again, feel happy to answer any other questions, and feel free to reach out if you have a more specific question or something that you're confused about, so that we can answer it for you.
The only thing I would say is definitely echoing what Shannon stated, and I know there was a lot in this presentation, but one important thing about our enforcement is that since COVID-19, the grand majority of you guys are doing an excellent job, so thank you very much. We are addressing the problem locations who are completely on the other side, and so where you do hear about our enforcement, we're really trying to make sure that we're balancing the behavior, and so that the good operators don't suffer because the bad operators are not following the rules. The other thing I want you to know is that our enforcement team has been divided up in conducting different type of enforcement. Sorry, excuse me. And so one of the things that is important for you to know is that our investigators are focusing a lot of their efforts on conducting active compliance, which means that we're making a lot of phone calls or we're doing proactive visits to make sure that we are informing you of the guidelines. So where we have to step in and conduct enforcement, that's a completely different story. But it's actually quite a small number of businesses that we're finding with that. If you are interested in the active compliance, meaning if you have a large business and you feel that you would like our investigators to come in and provide a general compliance overview of the regulations and to walk through your business with you and to point out the things that you could be doing better to improve, we are offering that right now. And to certainly let us know. Ivan Capofali, he is not on this call, but we are, if we are getting those requests, we are actually having a small team come out and provide that walkthrough with our business community so that you can have more information at your fingertips. So thank you again, and we look forward to continuing to stay the course and continuing to support you because we are actually your advocates. We're advocating for our businesses every day to the mayor and whoever will listen, but we also have that other balance. So thank you again for all you're doing, and Shannon and the team, all of our licensing team is working virtually, and we are processing licenses and applications. So we're here to support you as well. So thank you. Isaac, you can
Great. And we just do have two more questions that came in. Shannon, can you explain the Dram Shop certification that you mentioned earlier, what exactly the requirement is, and what the common violations that we see related to that are?
Sure. So the Dram Shop insurance is your liquor liability insurance. It's the same thing, just a different name. So proof that you have your valid liquor liability insurance, you need to have that certification from your insurance company, and it needs to be on hand. So the municipal code requires that it be produced at the request of either our investigators or the police department. And often when we go into an establishment to conduct an investigation, it's one of those things that we're always checking for. And, 99% of the time, of course, you have valid Dram Shop insurance. It would be ridiculous not to hold it as a liquor establishment, but you just can't produce your certification, so we don't know. So it's just a real easy thing if you can secure a copy of that and have it on hand and have your staff know where it is. It would just avoid a citation.
Okay, and then the last question I can handle, in addition to increasing capacity, is there any plan in place for allowing later hours of operation? I'll say that all of these guidelines are something that the mayor's office and the health department is looking very closely at, so not just increased capacity, also table size, gathering size, and operating hours is something that is being looked at every day. So there is not a formal plan in place right now, but we hope that if case rate can improve and if total cases can improve and other of the variety of other factors that go into this, that is something that we are looking closely at. Thank you all very much. I know I saw one or two questions come in. I do want to, I'll follow up with those individually in order to answer those questions. I do want to thank you all for your time. And again, follow up if you have any additional questions.
Thank you.